Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this individual executive member
Oh, hang
decision.
on. Right, if I just stop a second, that's my mother on the phone. Just give me a second.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this individual executive member decision. My name's Callum Wernham. I'm a Democratic and Electoral Services Officer, and I'm clerking this meeting. With me today, we have Pauline Jorgensen, who is the executive member for Highways and Transport. And from the officer side of things, we have Martin Heath, who is our Traffic Management, Parking and Road Safety Team Manager. And with that, I will hand over to Martin just to take us through the report. So, Martin.
Thanks, Callum. So just the purpose of this report is to confirm the Council's participation in Department for Transport consultation, an open consultation, public consultation, to decide on the future of pavement parking enforcement policy, including general favoured options for enforcement, in order for the Department for Transport to gain a thorough understanding of societal viewpoints. So the consultation follows a previous consultation by the DFT in 2019 to gather evidence on the scale of the problem. And they've now come forward with three suggestions as to how they think they might progress things. And this was an open consultation to allow for individuals in society, but also local authorities to respond on with their views about those three options. Okay. Do you want me to take you through the options?
Yeah, I think it would be useful briefly if you just took for the viewers just to take us very briefly through the options.
Okay, so under option one, based on research, the DFT looked at what it called the pain points experienced by those who interact with the TRO process, the traffic regulation order process, basically local authorities and applicants for those regulations. And it recommended changes to legislation and made recommendations for process reform. And those recommendations were to be subject to further consultation in 2020. Obviously, COVID has affected that. And the scope of legislative change, whether a change will be require primary and or secondary legislation, was to be based on the light of that earlier consultation. So that's the first option, is that there would be new legislation created to allow for the enforcement of pavement parking. The second option was that in addition to that option, the government would allow councils to enforce against what would be called unnecessary obstruction of the pavement. So this is not a general pavement parking prohibition, but it empowers local authorities to issue penalty charge notices in individual instances, perhaps allowing for an exception of 20 minutes or so, only applying to certain types of vehicle that would be allowed to park, but otherwise allowing local authorities to issue a penalty charge notice for parking on the pavement. And the third option was that in addition to option one, there would be an England-wide pavement parking prohibition. So rather than it being just a local authority determined decision, there would be a blanket ban on pavement parking, prohibiting pavement parking as a default position, but then still allowing councils to implement local exemptions for that, for that prohibition. So if we had, for example, narrow streets or difficult locations, then as an authority we could decide to take those streets out of the blanket prohibition. So option 2 is for local authorities to use the powers created under option 1 and create streets, designate streets where you can't park on the pavement. Option 3 would be that there would be a nationwide ban and we could take streets out of that option. Okay.
Thank you.
And we participated in that in the consultation in terms of just giving the views on how it might affect us as an authority and what we saw as the most beneficial.
Thanks for that, Martin. Pauline, did you have any queries or any comments or?
No, I think, Martin, it'd be useful if you just summarise basically where we came to in terms of the response.
Okay, so
I mean, we have discussed this already, but just for the tape.
yeah, yep. Okay, in its response, as a council, we recognise the challenges of implementing a national ban, but we do believe that there should be, or we have responded to say we believe that there should be a nationally established presumption against the parking of vehicles on footways. This is basically already in the highway code, and it would be difficult for a local authority on its own to impose those kinds of restrictions if, for example, its neighbouring authorities decided not to, and for road users to understand that those differences applied across different local authority borders and boundaries. So we have responded that we consider that some strengthening of regulations that enable TROs is required to assist enforcement of the existing highway obstruction and footway driving laws. And in addition to option 1, we would seek powers to enforce against unnecessary obstruction of pavements and verges through the issue of penalty charge notices. We also responded that we think that an England-wide pavement parking prohibition that allows local or highway authorities to designate streets with exemptions and to provide supporting measures, so for example signs and road markings that designated those exemptions, would reduce the burden of providing and maintaining a system like that. But we did not support a mandatory 20-minute exception for business vehicles, because this effectively would permit pavement parking, for example, by delivery vehicles, and increase the scope for challenge against TRO, penalty charge notices, because that time period is at odds with the 10-minute grace period that the council already applies to yellow lines, double yellow lines, and so on. So our suggestion was that something between option 2 and 3 would be best.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Martin. That's a good summary. I mean, I've got nothing further to add. We discussed it and changed it and messed around with it quite a few times. So I'm quite happy with that as a conclusion.
Okay, thank you for that, Pauline. So obviously Martin's taken us through the suggested response and you're happy with it. So I'm just going to, for anyone watching, the recommendation is set out on agenda page 5. And Paul, I'm just going to ask you if you're happy with it. The recommendation is that the Executive Member for Highways and Transport agree that the Council's participation in this consultation opportunity be noted and recorded. Are you happy with that, Pauline?
Yeah. Yes, I am, Callum.
Brilliant. So that will that decision will go live, subject to the 5-day standard call-in period, after which point this decision will be made official and a decision sheet will be signed at a later date. And with that, I will close the meeting. So thank you, Pauline, and thank you, Martin, for attending, and have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you, Callum.
Okay.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks both.